So here we are back on that machine that we created back on that last module. This is the machine win dash long string of random characters that we haven't really named yet. And one of the first tasks that we have to do with any machine is get it up and on the network so that we can download the updates and connect up to the internet and grab whatever software that we may require for this computer. What I do want to show you here is that if we're not yet quite ready to go through the command line process to configure networking on a machine, the process to configure networking in the Windows Server world is remarkably similar to what you're used to seeing over in the desktop world. You may see a couple of additional items here in the list of just services, networking services that are on this machine. But for the most part, when you're configuring an IPv4 address, you do the usual stuff with IP addresses and subnet masks and the gateway and the DNS server and so on. Jason will talk a little bit more here in the upcoming course next, when he goes through some of the more academia of IPv4 and IPv6 configurations. But for now, let's just assume that all we need is an IPv4 address on this machine, and then we also require this machine to have a redundant connection to the internet. Notice here that I have an Ethernet 0 machine and an Ethernet 0 network card and an Ethernet 1 network card here as well. Back in the old days, prior to these more recent versions of the operating system, when you had to get a server up and online with a redundant network connection, the only way to do that was through some manner of manufacturer-oriented driver that would handle the teaming for you. In previous versions of the operating system, Microsoft did not provide any kind of functionality to handle network teaming. And so because of that, you had to use whatever teaming driver that your manufacturer would support. Now, thankfully, in this version, we have the ability now to actually go about network teaming multiple networks together without having to go back to our manufacturer. And that really, in many ways, kind of greatly improves the whole experience of dealing with Windows Server. Because now Microsoft not only provides the code to do this, but also supports the network teaming. Network teaming can be configured, at least initially, over here by clicking the little disabled link here, where we can go about setting up network teaming for the two network interfaces that I've plugged into this machine. If you're following along at home, when you're creating your virtual machine in VMware Workstation or what have you, make sure that you have two physical network cards that are plugged into this machine so that you can support adding them here into the team that we'll now create. Let's go through that process here using the graphical user interface, and then here in just a minute we'll go through the same process over on our server core machine using the command line. So the first step we got to go through is actually creating the team, which happens under here under tasks and to create a new team. I'll give it a team name, our team, for lack of a better name, and then identify both of the two network adapters that I want to add here into the team. That's the easy part. The real interesting part actually happens down here under additional properties, because it's down here where the more important decisions have to be made. The first of which, and really the most important of which, is the teaming mode. There are 3 different teaming modes that you can select, 2 of which require the support of the network itself and particular configurations that are made at the network side. These are static teaming and LACP. If you plan on using network teaming here, the Windows network teaming, with either the static teaming configuration or the LACP configuration, you'll need to coordinate with your network engineers to make sure that either the proper configurations are set on the switch or that LACP is configured and also those proper configurations are made there as well. In either of these cases, again, there's the need for additional support over at the network side so that the network recognizes that there is indeed a team between these two adapters that it's plugging into. Now, the third of which is the switch independent mode here, which is actually kind of the coolest of 3, because in the switch independent mode, this mode allows you to configure a team that does not require any additional support or configuration over on the network side. So what's great here, particularly in like the demo environment that you're creating here, the lab environment you're building for this exam, if you don't have the kinds of advanced networking equipment that can support things like LACP or those additional configurations, it is entirely possible for you to create a switch-independent team that can be fully supported on your home or a lab network without any extra network engineers out there making configuration changes. Now, when you do configure any of these teaming modes, you've got then some additional configurations you have to do that determine how you want to handle the traffic coming in. The first of which is the load balancing mode. So in load balancing mode, you have the ability to choose how you want the traffic to be load balanced between the two different network cards that make up this team. Do you want to balance it based off of IP address hash, off of Hyper-V port if you're using Hyper-V, or just dynamically based off of the traffic that's coming in? In most cases, you'll find that dynamic is indeed the load balancing mode that you'll find yourself using, except if you're running Hyper-V, where you'll choose by Hyper-V port. In certain circumstances, like web servers being a particularly notable one, the address hash load balancing mode is useful because this mode ensures that incoming traffic is load balanced based off of the IP address it's coming from. As you can imagine, in a world where you've got a web server, for example, that's communicating with a variety of different incoming clients, it can be good to load balance those incoming clients based off of where they're coming from, just to distribute the load out appropriately. We're going to choose the dynamic load balancing mode here because it's the one that makes the most sense for the variety of different uses, potential uses that this server could be configured for. Now, if I do configure adapters into a team, I can also choose, if I want, to set one of the adapters here as a standby adapter. Now, the standby adapter only ever gets used in the situation where another adapter fails. And so in a two adapter configuration, if I configure a standby adapter, I essentially have a single network connection with failover as opposed to any form of load balancing. So for this purpose, we're going to keep this as none so that all of our adapters are available for load balancing any of the incoming traffic that comes in. I can also choose the primary team interface here, which allows me to configure for this team that I'm creating whether I'm handling all the traffic coming in or if I'm handling traffic coming in over a specific VLAN. So again, not much here to configure, but in comparison with some of the machinations you had to go through from your manufacturer drivers, Microsoft's implementation of network teaming here, at least in the graphical user interface, is something that's pretty cool, very easy to set up and very easy to use as well. You'll see here that at least initially, once we configure the initial team, that we get a little fault over here with one of the Ethernet adapters. But if we wait just a second, eventually our team sorts itself out and both adapters are now active.